Women worked alongside the Army in the desperate times of World War II. The Women's Army Corps was a United States Army unit created during World War II to enable women to serve in non-combat positions in the military. They had 150,000 volunteers. Members of the Women's Army Corps were the first women other than nurses to serve within the ranks of the United States Army. Approximately 350,000 American women joined the military during World War II.
Hey, there goes one of those petticoat soldiers now.
Yeah. My sister wants to join the WACs. What do you think of that?
Huh. She's crazy. What the devil's a woman want to be a soldier for?
Just a waste of time. This is a man's war. What sort of jobs can they do?
What sort of jobs can we do? Take a look, mister. X-ray technicians, inspectors of Army meat, teachers schooling our soldiers, WACs are classification experts, assignment interviewers.
So this is a man's war, is it? WACs are at work on every sort of Army vehicle, doing every sort of motor transport job, testing walkie-talkies, testing radio tubes. Those are just a few of the jobs they do. There are 239 more. Hey, you two armchair generals on the porch, here's something more for you to think about. Listen.
General Eisenhower said, "In many jobs, WACs do the work of two men. The Army needs and can use all it can get."
They worked as nurses, lab techs, drove trucks, repaired airplanes, and performed clerical work to free up men for combat. Those who joined the Women's Air Force service pilots flew planes from the factories to military bases. 15,000 served abroad. Cryptography was used extensively during World War II. America wasn't the only country tapping into its women during World War II. Thousands of British women worked at Bletchley Park, the famous home of England's code-breaking unit. They served a number of roles, including operators of the complex code-breaking computers known as the bomb machines, which deciphered the German Enigma codes. While the American codebreakers did assist the Allies in Europe, the majority of their work focused on the Pacific theater.
After the Pearl Harbor bombing, there was a new spirit of patriotism and service across the country, and many joined the military and the Red Cross. The U.S. mobilization effort focused on industry, producing massive amounts of war goods, including arms, ammunition, ships, tanks, jeeps, and airplanes, and they also employed as many people as possible, including women, to work in factories.
I worked in cordite, filling 40 millimeter casings with cordite. It reminded me of spaghetti in a way. It came in a wooden box to the table where we were weighing, and the box was about yay by yay, and they laid in there and they looked like long pieces of spaghetti, only a little fatter. Safety was the top priority. They had safety people all over the place, being very sure that there wasn't a speck of dust anywhere, that people were following all of the rules, because one spark of electricity would cause a big problem.
The nation needed to quickly mobilize its economy and military forces to fight in World War II. Although the war began with the Nazi Germany's attack on Poland in September 1939, the United States did not enter the war until after the Japanese bombed the American fleet in Hawaii on December 7, 1941, known as the Pearl Harbor. During the war, over 16 million Americans served in the United States Armed Forces, with 405,399 killed in action and 6,278 wounded. Educated at West Point, George S. Patton began his military career and became the first officer assigned to the new U.S. Army Tank Corps during World War I. Patton was a U.S. Army officer who was an outstanding practitioner of mobile tank warfare in the European and Mediterranean theaters during World War II. Patton had commanded the U.S. 7th Army in the Mediterranean theater of World War II and the U.S. 3rd Army in France and Germany following the Allied invasion of Normandy in June 1944. The United Kingdom, United States, Soviet Union, and France produced significant numbers of tanks before and during World War II. The early tanks of Germany were inferior to many of their opponents' tanks in the areas of armor and firepower. After World War II, most U.S. Army armored units were equipped with a mix of M4 Sherman and M26 Pershing tanks.
To make matters worse, Shermans required highly flammable, high-octane gasoline. Their engines were originally designed for airplanes.
in every decision that was made in the development and use of the Sherman, from beginning to end, they had to make choices between options. Okay, we need a high-powered engine with lightweight. Okay, we use this engine. It's an aviation engine. It burns more flammable fuel, but power is the most important thing, power and weight. Or we need a tank that can move very fast to exploit a breakthrough. So we can't have real heavy armor because that would slow it down. We'll have just enough armor for what we think we need.
The job of a Sherman tank maintenance engineer was a grisly one.
In the beginning of World War II, the British Royal Navy was the strongest navy in the world, with the largest number of warships built and with the naval bases across the globe, totaling over 15 battleships and battle cruisers, 7 aircraft carriers, 66 cruisers, 164 destroyers, and 66 submarines. In the course of war, the United States Navy grew tremendously as the United States was faced with a two-front war on the seas. By the end of World War II, the U.S. Navy was larger than any other navy in the world. The December 1941 surprise attack on Pearl Harbor did knock out the battle fleet, but it did not touch the aircraft carriers. In World War II, the Marines performed a central role in the Pacific War along with the U.S. Army. The battles of Guadalcanal, Bougainville, Tarawa, Guam, Tinian, Cape Gloucester, Saipan, Peleliu, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa saw fierce fighting between Marines and the Imperial Japanese Army.
We debarked from our ships. We landed on Okinawa and we had no idea of what kind of resistance we will encounter. There were no Japanese, there were no natives, there was nothing. We made our way immediately to the airport that had been deserted by the Japanese, and we found a good many destroyed planes and bombs, but no resistance. By the end of the second day, we had crossed the island, and that was when our trouble began.
The Double V campaign was a slogan and drive to promote the fight for democracy in overseas campaigns and at the home front in the United States for African Americans during World War II. The campaign first appeared in the African American newspaper Pittsburgh Courier on February 7, 1942. All ethnic and racial backgrounds joined the war. There was 300,000 Mexican Americans, 25,000 Native Americans, and 1 million African Americans, although with segregated units and limited supported roles. The campaign was popularized by American black leaders during World War II, emphasizing the need for double victory over Germany and Japan, and also over racial prejudice in the U.S. Many blacks who fought for the World War II were disappointed that the America they returned to had hate and racial tension. The U.S. mobilization effort focused on industry producing massive amounts of war goods, including arms, ammunition, ships, tanks, and airplanes, and employed as many people as possible, which also include women to work in the factories. The nation needed to quickly mobilize its economy and military forces to fight in World War II. The industrial performance of the nation in support of mobilization was unprecedented, and it called upon the American industry to drop everything and focus on war materials. The War Production Board was an agency of the United States government that supervised war production during World War II. President Franklin D. Roosevelt had established this in 1942 in Executive Order 9024. The purpose of the board was to regulate the production and distribution of resources and materials during World War II and to convert the peacetime economy industry to a war economy. The Ford Motor Company assembly plant in Richmond, California, was the largest assembly plant to be built on the West Coast, and its conversion to wartime production during World War II aided the nation's war effort. This was built in 1930 during the Great Depression. The assembly plant was measured nearly 500,000 square feet. During the war, it built B-24 Liberator bombers with one completed per hour. Liberty ships were a class of cargo ship built in the United States during World War II. Although their design was British, the U.S. desired these ships because they were low cost and required simple construction. They were mass-produced on an unprecedented scale, and the Liberty ship came to symbolize the U.S. wartime industrial output. They were built to put Allies' advantages concerning trade because of their losses from U-boats. But they were a failure because America could not produce them faster than Germany, and Germany could also sink them. They were also small and slow with several flaws in construction and design. Liberty ships were constructed of steel that experienced a ductile to brittle transition. Some of them were deployed to the frigid North Atlantic, where the once ductile metal experienced brittle fracture when temperatures dropped. The government had found it necessary to ration food, gas, and even clothing during this time. Americans were asked to conserve on everything. Rationing would deeply affect the American way of life for most. The federal government needed to control supply and demand. And the U.S. funded its World War II effort largely by raising taxes and tapping into Americans' personal savings. During the war, Americans purchased approximately $186 billion worth of war bonds, accounting for nearly 3/4 of total federal spending from 1941 to 1942. The United States Office of War Information was a United States government agency created during World War II. It operated from June 1942 until September 1945. This served as an important U.S. government propaganda agency during World War II. Its purpose was to centralize the many information services of the United States government and create a single line of communication about the war to the American public.